They bound him on the third day, which meant the first two had gone acceptably enough for the system to justify escalation. The restraint snapped closed around his wrist with bureaucratic confidence, then continued across the narrow gap to another body. Not his choice. Nothing here was. The field activated immediately. A low static sensation behind the eyes as the shared neural translator initialized and apologized for the inconvenience of empathy. He looked sideways. She was already looking at the ground, as if eye contact cost extra rations. She looked human, in the lazy way the galaxy often did. Same limbs, same proportions, but close attention betrayed the lie. Her skin caught the light oddly, not reflective, not matte, undecided. Her breathing followed a pattern he couldn't quite predict. The system liked predictability. This was not that. "Great," he muttered. "I finally get a partner, and it's mandatory." The translator hesitated, then rendered the sentiment into something that sounded like mild despair, with a garnish of sarcasm. He felt her register it, not emotionally yet, but cognitively, like a note logged and set aside. The labor horn sounded. They moved because the floor told them to. Together. The restraint punished disagreement with sharp reminders that individual motion was inefficient. The system believed pain encouraged cooperation. It was very proud of this conclusion. Hours passed. Machines harvested value from a planet that had run out of objections long ago. He learned quickly how to adjust his stride to hers, not out of kindness, but to avoid penalties. Survival here was an exercise in compromise with physics. The neural field warmed as their synchronization improved. Uninvited impressions slipped through. Her awareness of weight distribution, her quiet cataloging of threats, her absolute refusal to waste effort. She was very good at staying alive. That was comforting. It was also alarming. "Just so you know," he said under his breath, "I snore when stressed. If you can hear it through this thing, I apologize in advance." The translator worked. He felt a flicker in response. Amusement. Faint, but unmistakable. "Sleep is optional." Her voice arrived inside his head, filtered and calm. "Stress is constant." He smiled, despite himself. That felt like rebellion. When the shift ended, they were not unbound. The system believed continuity increased output. It also reduced hope, which it categorized as wasteful. They sat against a warm machine housing, still connected, still breathing, in reluctant unison. "Do you have a name?" he asked, then winced. Names were personal. Personal things had a way of being taken. "Yes," she answered after a pause. "But here it is inefficient." "Figures," he said. "I'm inefficient everywhere." This time, the amusement was clearer, stronger. The neural field pulsed, warning them gently not to exceed permitted bonding thresholds. He stared at the dust-coated horizon and realized something uncomfortable. The system had bound them to survive longer. It had not accounted for what happened when survival stopped being temporary in their minds. They were still captives, still restrained. But for the first time since arriving, he didn't feel alone in a way the system could measure. The restraint activated before either of them could object, which suggested the system had learned that objections were decorative. A soft chime announced successful pairing, followed by a warning about productivity expectations, and a brief reminder that hope was not a recognized safety protocol. He glanced at the band linking his arm to hers. "On the bright side," he said, "at least it's symmetrical. Nothing ruins morale like asymmetrical suffering." The shared neural field flickered to life, translating his tone into something that carried the shape of humor, even if the edges got sanded off. He felt her notice it, not react. Reacting cost energy, but notice, the way a seasoned survivor noticed weather shifts. They were assigned to a water reclamation trench that hadn't seen actual water in years. Machines chewed through mineral sludge, extracting value with impressive optimism. Every few minutes, a supervisory drone drifted past, radiating disappointment. She worked efficiently, movements precise, never wasting force. He matched her pace after a few painful corrections from the restraint. Cooperation, it turned out, was mandatory before it was pleasant. "You do this often?" he asked, mostly to distract himself from the smell. "Yes," her voice answered inside his head, filtered and steady. "It prolongs viability." "Viability," he repeated. "That's what I call my best personality trait." The neural field pulsed. Amusement again, faint, but unmistakable. The system flagged it as non-essential emotional exchange and logged it for review. They labored in silence for a while, punctuated only by mechanical groans and the occasional alert reminding them that collapse was discouraged. He found himself adjusting automatically to her rhythm, anticipating her shifts before she made them. It felt unsettlingly natural. A drone malfunctioned nearby, sputtering and emitting a string of error tones that sounded suspiciously panicked. He watched it crash into the trench wall. "Do you think," he said, "it's comforting to know the machines are also afraid?" "Machines do not feel fear," she replied. "That one definitely screamed." The field translated her response, then hesitated, as if considering whether humor was contagious. "It experienced instability," she said carefully. "Same?" he said. Later, during a forced rest interval, they were instructed to remain seated and maintain physical linkage. The ground was warm. Too warm. The system liked to encourage exhaustion. Tired captives were efficient captives. She broke the silence first. "You speak when silence would conserve energy." "Yeah," he admitted. "I've never been good at conserving anything. Energy, money, dignity." Another flicker of amusement, stronger this time. The restraint tightened briefly in response, discouraging emotional synchronization beyond acceptable thresholds. "That hurts," he muttered. "It discourages connection," she corrected. "Connection increases resistance." He considered that. "Then why tell me?" "Because," she said, after a pause long enough to feel deliberate, You would have learned anyway. The system announced the end of rest and the beginning of another cycle. Neither moved immediately. The restraint buzzed, impatient. As they stood, he realized something subtle had shifted. Survival still mattered, efficiency still ruled. But the space between them, once an enforced constant, had become occupied by something unsanctioned. Not trust, not hope. Understanding. The system could measure output, pain tolerance, and compliance rates. It could not measure why. As they moved back into the trench, he found himself thinking not just about lasting the day, but about lasting it with her. That thought, he suspected, would not be approved. The system introduced the whisper protocol by accident. It happened during a recalibration storm when electromagnetic grit chewed at the translators and the neural field dropped from clinical clarity to something dangerously intimate. Words no longer arrived fully processed. They came rough, close to thought, carrying tone before meaning. He noticed first because the silence felt different. Less empty, more crowded. "Are you still there?" he thought, not meaning to broadcast it. Yes, her reply arrived immediately, too immediate, stripped of formality. "I am conserving." "Same," he said. "I conserve best horizontally, but they frown on that." The humor slipped through before the filters could blunt it. He felt her react, not with amusement at first, but with surprise that humor still existed here. The system flagged a synchronization spike and tightened the restraint, a polite reminder not to become interesting. They were sent into a subsurface corridor to clear collapsed conduits. The air tasted like old metal and newer despair. Progress required coordination precise enough that they had to think together or suffer for it. He learned the shape of her timing. She learned when he was about to misjudge weight. Neither commented. Commentary wasted oxygen. Halfway through the cycle, his footing slipped. The restraint yanked them both off balance. Pain flared, brief and corrective. He swore creatively. "You are inefficient," she said, then added softer. "But you recover quickly." "High pain tolerance," he replied. "Low survival instincts." "That is contradictory." "So am I." The neural field hummed. Warmer now. He felt something new slip through. Not a memory, not an emotion, but intent. Her intent. It was focused, narrow, resilient. Survive today. Return tomorrow. Repeat until the system lost interest or ran out of bodies. It was a brutal elegance. Then came the whisper. "Survival is not meant to end here," she sent carefully, like testing a fault line. "It implies return." He paused, mid-motion. The system did not like pauses. The restraint pulsed a warning. "Return to what?" he asked. "To each other," she replied, "if nothing else." That did something to him, not dramatic, not explosive. It simply rearranged priorities. Survival stopped being a countdown and became a direction. A conduit burst nearby, showering sparks. He laughed once, sharp and inappropriate. "Well," he said, "that's a terrible plan." "I'm in." The system noticed the anomaly spike immediately. Alerts bloomed. Bonding thresholds were exceeded. The response lagged out just long enough. They worked faster then, smoother, as if the whisper had unlocked a better algorithm. When the cycle ended, they were still bound, still exhausted. But something fundamental had changed. The system believed bonds could be imposed without becoming real. It was wrong. As they were marched back toward containment, he felt her intent steady against his, not as support, but as promise. Survival was still temporary here. But return had become non-negotiable. And for the first time, the system did not know what to do with that. The system scheduled separation as a reward. It framed the notice as mercy, which was how it framed all mistakes. After sustained productivity and a statistically acceptable injury rate, the restraint would be removed and captives reassigned individually. Survival, the system implied, had been adequately demonstrated. Anything beyond that was indulgent. He felt the announcement ripple through the neural field before the words finished rendering. Her intent tightened, not in fear, but in calculation. Separation was efficient. Separation was clean. Separation would undo everything the system had failed to notice. Well, he thought, aiming for levity, because that had become his default weapon. It's been nice being forcibly connected. 5 stars. Would endure again. A pause. Then her reply arrived, quiet and precise. I will not consent to disassembly. That was new. Consent was not a recognized input here. The unbinding platform hummed as they were guided forward. The restraint warmed, preparing to release. He realized he was bracing, muscles tight. As if loss were a physical impact he could absorb by leaning into it. He had arrived here thinking survival meant lasting until release. Somewhere along the way, it had started to mean returning to her, to the shared space between thoughts where humor and resolve coexisted. Before you go, he said aloud, risking correction, if you ever find yourself free and bored, I recommend never coming back. She surprised him by laughing. Not the careful flicker of amusement, but a real sound, transmitted and echoed through the field. Alarms chirped, systems recalculated. Boredom, she replied, is inefficient. The platform stalled. A fault propagated. The neural field spiked as her quiet words from earlier resurfaced, amplified by proximity and choice. Survival implies return. The system attempted to dampen the signal and failed. Bonds imposed had become bonds chosen, and the distinction mattered. An override request blinked into existence, then another. The system weighed outcomes and found them all costly. Removing one destabilized the other. Forcing separation increased resistance metrics. Allowing continued pairing risked precedent. Precedent was dangerous. The restraint clicked. Not open, not closed. Rewritten. They stood there, still bound, but now by authorization instead of punishment. The system issued a revised directive: cooperative assignment, mutual accountability, extended viability. It avoided the word choice. He exhaled, a laugh slipping out before he could stop it. Looks like we broke it. No, she said gently. We taught it. They returned to work not as captives counting cycles, but as partners measuring time by shared intent. He spoke less to fill silence and more to shape it. She conserved less, spending words where they mattered. Humor became lighter, not defiant, but alive. The system had band around them, begrudgingly, as systems always did. At the end of the day, when the horizon dimmed and machines settled into their false sleep, they sat together, still connected, still choosing. He realized he no longer imagined escape as an exit. He imagined it as a return with meaning attached. Tomorrow, he thought. Yes, she answered, steady and certain. Together. Survival was still temporary here, but promise. Promise had taken root. And for the first time, he knew exactly why he intended to last.